Mi nombre es Rafael Herrera, yo soy el chair de Finanzas de la Cámara de AmCham, Panamá. Soy socio de Ernst Young, localizado acá en Panamá, y trabajo para Latinoamérica en múltiples funciones operativas y también soy un socio de auditoría. Okay, hoy vamos a presentar un excelente tema que hemos titulado Navegando las obligaciones fiscales como expatriado. Para ello nos está acompañando tres grandes expositores, Melinda Schmidt como Principal de Global Compliance Services, María Lucía Toruño como Presta Servicios de GCSP Partner, y David Tuñón, Profesional de Gestión Patrimonial en GM Bank. Okay. Melinda Schmidt presta servicios de QI, de Qualified Intermediario, en GCS Partner. Desde el inicio de este régimen, Melinda brindaba asesoría técnica tributaria a instituciones financieras locales e internacionales, con un enfoque en los requisitos de reporte de información fiscal y retención en Estados Unidos. A lo largo de más de 30 años de experiencia atendiendo instituciones financieras, Melinda ha desarrollado una sólida especialización en los regímenes de QI y FATCA, así como las normativas del IRS relacionadas con reporte de información y las obligaciones de retención. Por otro lado, María Lucía Toruño presta servicios de QI para GCS Partner, es abogada y especialista certificada en delitos financieros, que se denomina CFCS, con experiencia en evaluación de riesgo y en cumplimiento regulatorio dentro del sector financiero. Ha participado en el diseño de instrumentos jurídicos, en implementación de controles de cumplimiento y en la gestión de diversos proyectos, siempre de la perspectiva integral y estratégica. Su enfoque combina el análisis jurídico y regulatorio con una visión práctica del negocio, facilitando la comprensión de requisitos normativos complejos, la adaptación a los cambios y la investigación inteligente de recursos en las instituciones financieras. David Tuñón es un profesional de la gestión patrimonial de MMG Bank, especializado en la administración de inversiones y la planificación patrimonial internacional para personas y familias de alto patrimonio. Nacido y formado en los Estados Unidos, cuenta con experiencia de primera mano en procesos de reubicación internacional y en cumplimiento de las obligaciones de declaración tributaria de ese país, lo que permite aportar una perspectiva práctica y valiosa a clientes con movilidad internacional. Bueno, bienvenidos. Pueden iniciar su presentación. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días a todos. Voy a compartir mi pantalla. ¿Me confirman si pueden verla? Ok, excelente. Bueno, quiero agradecer primeramente a la Cámara Americana de Comercio e Industrias por el espacio y a todos ustedes por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Dentro de la agenda vamos a ver un poco sobre Panamá en el nuevo escenario de movilidad internacional. Vamos a ver consideraciones específicas fiscales relacionadas a los expats que deciden y escogen Panamá como ese destino atractivo, los diferentes sistemas tributarios y las consideraciones específicas para los US expats. Y aterrizaremos todo lo que vamos a conversar a través de un Ground Experience. Pueden ir dejando sus preguntas a lo largo de la presentación y al final vamos a responderlas. En los últimos años hemos visto un cambio muy interesante en la forma en que las personas viven, trabajan e invierten. Hace apenas una década era común que una persona desarrollara toda su vida financiera dentro de un mismo país. Hoy eso ha cambiado. Es más frecuente encontrar, por ejemplo, una persona que vive en Panamá, pero que tiene inversiones en Estados Unidos, que adquiere propiedades en Europa, que tiene sociedades en diferentes jurisdicciones y que incluso tiene familiares distribuidos alrededor del mundo. Y esta movilidad internacional trae grandes oportunidades, pero también trae nuevos retos. Porque entender cuando una persona cambia, decide mudarse a otro país, no se trata solamente de obtener una residencia migratoria, sino que implica comprender cómo todos los sistemas financieros, regulatorios, fiscales se conectan. Y precisamente de eso queremos conversar hoy. Durante muchos años, la movilidad internacional estuvo asociada principalmente a la búsqueda de ventajas fiscales. Hoy la decisión de una persona de mudarse a otro país responde a una decisión patrimonial mucho más amplia. Y este fenómeno ha dado paso a un nuevo perfil de cliente global, cuya planificación y necesidades trascienden las fronteras de un solo país. Y en este contexto, entonces, se ubica Panamá como un destino atractivo, gracias a la combinación de diferentes factores que vamos a analizar a continuación. Entre ellos está su conectividad regional e internacional, su ubicación estratégica entre América del Norte y América del Sur, está también su conectividad con Estados Unidos, su conectividad con Europa. Tenemos una estabilidad financiera y una economía dolarizada, lo que ha dado paso a mayor autorregulación de los bancos, un centro financiero consolidado con presencia de bancos internacionales, nuestras capacidades desarrolladas para poder gestionar el patrimonio de nuestros clientes. Un punto también que sin duda atrae a los expatriados es su sistema tributario territorial. Y sobre este punto me quiero detener un poco. Como sabemos, en Panamá se grava únicamente aquellos ingresos que surten efecto económico dentro de la República de Panamá. Lo que quiere decir que los ingresos de origen extranjero no enfrentan impuestos panameños. Sobre este punto, también otro de las ventajas es que los ingresos por pensiones y las sucesiones y herencias están exentas de impuestos. La ganancia de capital también tiene una tasa muy baja en comparación, por ejemplo, con otras economías más desarrolladas. Los programas de migración para inversionistas, empresarios y jubilados. Según datos del MISI, para abril del 2026, el programa de inversionista calificado registra unos 739 inversionistas, lo que se traduce en 359 millones de dólares, concentrados específicamente en el sector inmobiliario, en los contratos de promesa de compra-venta, en casas de valores, depósitos a plazo fijo. Otro aspecto primordial es el acceso a la salud. En Panamá representa un 60 hasta un 70% en costos inferiores a los Estados Unidos. Su seguridad jurídica y su transparencia tras salir de las listas grises. Y por último, pero no menos importante, la calidad de vida. Panamá cuenta con zonas residenciales de lujo que definitivamente atrae a los expatriados, y también la educación y la presencia de escuelas internacionales. Para esta diapositiva estamos observando una gráfica de Henley Private Wealth Migration Report en el 2025, que nuestro colega Luis Cigarruista podrá dar veracidad a la información. Panamá se ubicó dentro de los 10 mercados de riqueza de mayor crecimiento del mundo. Desde el año 2014 al año 2024, su población de personas de alto patrimonio creció en un 69%. Esto sin duda refuerza a Panamá en su posición como un destino atractivo para inversionistas y expatriados. También Panamá encabezó el índice global anual de jubilación del International Living como el mejor destino del mundo para jubilarse en el año 2025. Y el perfil del expatriado que llega a Panamá no es el que comúnmente conocemos, como los empresarios multinacionales o los jubilados, sino que hoy día también estamos recibiendo empresarios digitales, estamos recibiendo consultores internacionales que ofrecen sus servicios alrededor del mundo, familias que, como mencioné, lo que están buscando es esa estabilidad política y educación, y personas de alto patrimonio que buscan diversificar estos riesgos geográficos. Cuando una persona decide mudarse a Panamá, cambia mucho más que su dirección. Cambia la forma en que las instituciones financieras empiezan a observar la situación patrimonial del cliente. Y aquí también empiezan a surgir diferentes preguntas a los expatriados, como por ejemplo, ¿de dónde soy residente fiscal? ¿Qué país puede gravar mis ingresos? ¿Cómo este cambio de residencia afecta mi patrimonio y mis inversiones? Ahora, ¿qué obligaciones de reporte mantengo? Y aquí el concepto principal más importante para cualquier expatriado es entender que residencia migratoria no equivale necesariamente a residencia fiscal. Una persona puede vivir en Panamá y además de ser residente fiscal en Panamá, ser obligado tributario en otra jurisdicción. Y un ejemplo práctico, un empresario latinoamericano que, digamos, vive en Panamá, pero que sigue manejando sus negocios fuera de la jurisdicción panameña, o que mantiene sus centros de intereses en otro país. Incluso que, digamos, pasa la mayor parte de su tiempo en otra jurisdicción. La conclusión no siempre será que Panamá es su residencia fiscal. Paralelamente a todo esto que hemos estado conversando, el sistema financiero internacional también ha evolucionado a mayores niveles de transparencia. Y hoy día las instituciones financieras operan bajo diferentes estándares internacionales como CRS, FATCA, QI, AML, Beneficial Owner, entre otros estándares. Y lo que ha traído como nuevo reto estos estándares es la consistencia de la información. Lo que yo como expatriado, por ejemplo, le reporte a mi asesor legal, a mi asesor financiero, a mi contador, a mi autoridad fiscal, tiene que ser consistente y debe reflejar entonces la realidad patrimonial del cliente. Para las instituciones financieras ya no consiste únicamente en administrar activos, sino que tiene que comprender cómo está organizado el patrimonio de su cliente, cuál es el propósito detrás de cada una de esas estructuras y cómo se conectan para poder cumplir con estas obligaciones regulatorias y fiscales, tanto a nivel nacional como a nivel internacional. Y aquí la mayoría de las dificultades o los retos que observamos en la práctica provienen de situaciones, por ejemplo, del trato a clientes con múltiples residencias fiscales. Muchas veces los clientes buscan crear estructuras que cumplan con cierta jurisdicción, por ejemplo, Colombia, y que al mismo tiempo sean eficientes impositivamente bajo las normas de Estados Unidos. Otro reto, otro riesgo es comprender que existen en efecto diferentes vehículos o vehículos, digamos, diferenciados por jurisdicciones. Y a esto me refiero a que lo que en Panamá se entiende como una sociedad anónima no necesariamente aplica la misma estructura, las mismas reglas en otra jurisdicción. Y el reto aquí es poder brindarles entonces la documentación adecuada para poder sustentar el patrimonio del cliente. También recordemos que las obligaciones documentales son cambiantes, es importante estar al día con cada una de ellas y monitorear también los cambios de residencia y los cambios de circunstancias de nuestros clientes. Y como mencioné anteriormente, es fundamental la comunicación entre los asesores a fin de que exista esta consistencia de información que exigen el sistema financiero internacional. Y dentro de este panorama de retos para las instituciones financieras, está surgiendo un nuevo, que es el de la ley de sustancia económica. Esta ley de la ley 526 del 28 de mayo de 2026 incorporó entonces en el Código Fiscal un nuevo capítulo que establece los requisitos de sustancia económica. Y aquí hace énfasis en dos condiciones específicamente. Primero, que aplica a dos o más entidades de un grupo multinacional, es decir, que tengan el mismo control y propiedad. y que estén en que tengan diferentes residencias fiscales. Y la otra condición es que generen ingresos pasivos de fuente extranjera. No profundizaremos en esta ley porque sigue en proceso de reglamentación y bueno, en ese momento podremos discutir sobre la aplicabilidad de la misma. Hasta el momento hemos discutido un poco de las diferentes consideraciones de cualquier expatriado que escoja a Panamá como su destino. Sin embargo, hay un grupo específico de expatriados que tienen condiciones particulares porque su sistema tributario es diferente al nuestro y son los ciudadanos estadounidenses. Y esto resulta sumamente relevante porque una proporción importante de los expatriados de alto patrimonio que vienen a Panamá provienen de Estados Unidos y de Canadá. Y bueno, para analizar las particularidades de estos ciudadanos estadounidenses, nos va entonces a comentar un poco más de esto Melinda. So let's switch to English and now Melinda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. And we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So good to be with all of you. International tax is a huge topic, as you all know. I'm going to really narrow down the topic and focus on expats, and really expats from the perspective of a financial institution, so that you would know if you were establishing an account for an expat, and specifically a U.S. one, what you would really be up against. But first, a few broad concepts. First off, the determination of tax is subject to the country. So in Panama, you have your own set of tax rules. I'm a U.S. person, as you know. We have an explosive set of U.S. tax rules here, and every other country has their own tax laws. Governments usually limit the scope of their taxation to their territorial income. Sometimes it could be extraterritorial income. And we'll talk about which ones which and how they work, whether they're a territorial tax system, a residence-based tax system, or an exclusionary tax system. You would think an awful lot of people would be jumping right out to the exclusionary tax system if they come from a very high tax country. However, you didn't see any of those on the list that Maria talked about earlier as the ones where the millionaires go, at least not the top 10. Anyhow, many governments tax their individuals or enterprises on income. Income tax systems may impose tax, like I said before, only on local income or on worldwide income. I don't know too many of them that are worldwide, except for the US. Generally, when it's worldwide income, like the US, foreign tax credits are provided for taxes paid to other jurisdictions. Usually, those credits are for either US people or if non-US people are paying tax and there is a tax treaty in place through a tax treaty reduction in tax. Moving to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about international tax concepts from whether your tax system is either a territorial one or a residence-based one. For a territorial one, only local income, meaning the income that is sourced inside the country, is taxed. Whereas a residence-based system taxes residents on worldwide income, meaning what they earned or were paid locally, as well as from foreign jurisdictions. Non-residents typically in a residence-based system are only taxed on their local income. So moving on, we talk about a little bit of the US tax situation. If you were to accept an expat as a new account holder in your financial institution, one of the first things you'd need to figure out are their tax status. And this is really important because a US financial institution, the U.S. tax system wants to know this very thing. So what you need to do is figure out, are they a U.S. person, meaning a U.S. citizen, no matter if they're opening an account in Panama or anywhere else. If they're a U.S. person, meaning a U.S. citizen, they're always a U.S. citizen, no matter where they establish an account. A U.S. resident is a person that is resident in the U.S., meaning they are living in the U.S. They've become a lawful permanent resident of the U.S. by obtaining what we call a green card, or if their physical presence in the U.S. meets the substantial presence test. This is an important designation because a U.S. resident is treated like a U.S. person for U.S. tax rules. And then there's the non-U.S. non-resident, meaning, let's say you're a Panamanian person, so you're a non-U.S. person, and you live in Panama, meaning you're not living in the U.S. So you're not a U.S. person, you're not a U.S. resident, you're a non-U.S. non-resident, which are often called in the U.S. regulations non-resident alien. Kind of a strange name, but anyway, that's what they've chosen. And to abbreviate it, we call it an NRA. You may have heard NRA in, NRA tax, NRA person, and that is exactly what it means. It's either tax on non-U.S. non-residents or a person that's not living in the U.S. and not considered a U.S. person. Okay, moving on. So who's subject to tax? It's pretty basic. Number one, a U.S. citizen and a resident alien, and they're subject to tax on worldwide income, regardless of where they earned it or the source of the income. If they're a U.S. person, no matter and living in the U.S. for a resident alien and a U.S. citizen, they're taxed on worldwide income. What's the exception to that? Well, the exception is for a resident who has a green card. If they request that green card is revoked, they fill out this form I-407, and they get that revoked. Similarly, a U.S. person can renounce their U.S. citizenship, and they have to follow various procedures, but then they renounce their citizenship and they get a form that shows that they've renounced. In either case, you want to see a copy of that documentation if you're establishing an account for a U.S. person so that you can prove that they are non-U.S. A green card holder that surrenders his or her green card is now treated as a non-resident alien, and NRAs are subject to U.S. tax only on their U.S. source income. So if you're a Panamanian person investing into the U.S., you're only taxed on the U.S. source income that's paid on your investment. You're not taxed by the U.S. on your income worldwide outside of the U.S. Okay, moving right along. Panamanian financial institutions. So what are the considerations for accepting an expat? Well, it's mainly three subjects: documentation, operations, and reporting. For the documentation side, you want to collect all of the required documentation that's mandated by your own Panamanian regulations. So you have to get that. It's usually all the AML type documentation. And then if it's a U.S. person, you have to get an IRS certification form, which is either a W-8, and there's 4 or 5 of them. And so you have to get the one that applies to your client, or a W-9. If you're an intermediary, you can accept other documentation in lieu of a W-8, but you'd have to be what's called a qualified intermediary to accept something else other than a W-8. In addition, you'd have to make sure your documentation that supports a FATCA status and a CRS status. For U.S. persons, even though you might collect an individual's self-certification, and that's fine, it's a good thing to have, but for US purposes, you don't have to have it because an individual typically doesn't become anything other than an individual. But for entities, you have to have either an entity certification or an IRS W-8 form. Okay, then operations. Can your financial institution's systems and procedures handle the requirements that would come from handling or managing an account of a US or other expat? And finally, regulatory reporting. If you've got a US person, they are subject to US taxes, as I mentioned before, even if they live in Panama. So you have to have an ability or a vendor that can take on the US tax reporting for you. And also you have to be able to recognize the account for FATCA reporting. Moving forward, US income tax. So this is the income that's subject to tax from the United States. Number one, earned income. That happens a lot. We're not unique on that one. Portfolio income. This is your investment income, whether it's interest, dividends, royalties, or whenever you sell securities. The US tax system taxes on the gain of investment property. And then finally, passive income, which is traditionally rental income, rental real estate income. So those are all subject to tax. If you're a US person, you're facing tax on all of that, and you have to file a tax return annually and pay tax on these kinds of income. It's not hard for a financial institution to manage those responsibilities, but they just have to learn them and develop them. But it really, as a US person, helping a financial institution become able to handle expats from the US, not really all that hard. You just have to do it. But you can't just one day say, yeah, sure, I'll take a US person's account and have no way to manage it. And finally, in Panama, who and what is subject to tax? Well, you all know the subject, but income subject to tax is employment income, just like US, self-employment and business income, again, just like the US, and investment income, but not worldwide investment income. All right, I'm going to look at the countries where there was significant expat activity and talk about how their tax systems work. And so first off, Panama is listed at the very top, and you can see it's a territorial system, taxes local income, but not other income. I won't read the rest of it to you. I'll jump right down to US, and you'll see it's the worst of the three, or worst of all of them. And it's worse because it taxes everything and taxes everyone. So if you are investing in US markets, you're going to pay tax on any of the income that you make from the securities that are considered US, no matter where you are. And then the rest of the countries, as you see, are a variation of all of these. I'm going to move on for the essence of time and turn this over to David.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Mi nombre es David Tuñón Snedeker. Soy asesor financiero con MMG Bank. My name is David Tuñón Snedeker. I with MMG. As you probably are already starting to notice, I have a very gringo accent, un acento muy gringo, and that's a good reason for it. I was born, raised, educated, and began my career in the United States. And at 35, I immigrated to Panama, and shortly after that, joined MMG Bank as a wealth manager, investment advisor. And I have a little bit of a funny story about my immigration process. During it, I actually picked up a second last name, Snedeker. As many of you might know, in the United States, we just use our father's last names and we don't use our mother's maiden name. But as I filled out the paperwork and they asked for my segundo apellido, told me it was my mother's last name, I was surprised to see my cedula come back with Snedeker on it. But it was good. because all my life I was used to meeting somebody for the first time, whether it be a teacher or a coach or a colleague, and they would see the squiggly line over my N and the accent on my O and ask me, well, how do you pronounce that? And here in Panama, everybody can pronounce my last name. And they actually have to help me pronounce it sometimes. But they come to my second last name, Snedeker, and that's when they go, oh, ¿cómo se pronuncia eso? So it's just a little bit about my immigration story. And over the next 9 minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the odyssey of immigration and give you, the members of the business community, insights to help foreign clients and partners through their journey. And I'll use the very popular movie, The Odyssey, to help bring some of these ideas to life. So moving over to the next slide, if you've seen the movie, you know one of the themes that moves through the movie is Zeus's Law, how to welcome a guest, how to welcome a newcomer. And the principle is simple. The principle is simple. The host welcomes a stranger, offering the same kind of kindness and guidance they would seek if they themselves were far from home. And the reason that the ancient Greeks practiced this is they believed that the guest, even if they were dressed in a humble, worn robe of a beggar, could actually be a god or Zeus himself. Now, I'm not trying to imply that guests and immigrants coming to Panama are going to turn out to be gods or even just wear robes. But even if they're dressed in Hawaiian shirts and flip-flops, they may turn out to be a loyal client or even a lucrative and skilled business partner. And the business community should offer newcomers the same guidance that they would hope to receive themselves, not only where to go to eat, but also to understand the institutional systems and the unwritten rules. And sometimes this means thinking a few steps ahead on their behalf. And to do that well, we must be willing to step into their shoes, walk part of their journey, and see the path through their eyes. So let me take you through a little of the immigrant's journey, which unfolds much like the Odyssey in 3 acts. And the first act is the call to adventure, whether it's for business or personal, and many of the reasons that Maria and Lucía laid out in the presentation, they have chosen a new country, Panama, for their next chapter. And after they complete the enjoyable and touristic tasks of tasting some new foods like chicharrón, patacón, and go into some festivals, maybe Milk Polleras or Festival de Guararé, Mejorana in Guararé, or hiking Volcán Barú or visiting Cunayala, they ultimately understand that choosing a place, Panama, is only the beginning. The real journey that they will need to make is a transition from being a tourist to part of Panamanian society and the economy. And so begins the conflict in our guest story. And they meet with the second act, the test. And this is where us, members of the business community, can really shine and act by Zeus's Law. The guest needs several services to truly integrate into the society and economy, some which have been better defined than others. For instance, Panama has a very well-defined residency process. Through the different visa categories, they're clearly laid out in the decrees, whether it be the pensioner visa, friendly nations visa, investment visa, and there's very good professional practitioners and lawyers like Avalera Montefiore with Morgan & Morgan that prepare our guests for their journey and guide them through the test in establishing their legal residency. Housing is actually a very familiar process. It has few barriers. There's many professional realtors that are eager to help our visitor find the place to live. But unfortunately, in my industry, banking, our guests often find themselves facing what seems like never-ending questioning, unsurmountable paperwork. They become frustrated with the task that they believe will be one of the easiest, lost in what may feel like the banking abyss. Next slide. And this is where we should once again put ourselves in the guest's shoes and understand the challenge in their perspective in order to properly guide them. At home, for our guests, setting up a bank account is a routine task, often completed under an hour, because the guest is known. Simply with their social security number or driver's license, the banker knows information such as their credit score and their home address, and can help them with a bank account to manage 5 or 6 figures and receive a credit card with very little friction. In Panama, it's important to let them know that they are unknown, and it is our responsibility in the banking and business community to help guide our guests to become known and to show Zeus's law of hospitality. So in the next slide, if there's one takeaway from my presentation, hospitality in business and banking is providing the guests with a clear map and instructions to follow. Clear lists that if the guest completes these lists, they will be accepted, and whether that being a bank account or a business license, they will be able to complete their tasks. And also from our perspective, as the provider or the partner, understanding that guests may feel frustrated with these lists or find them overreaching, this is where we can really educate the client on the challenges that we also face. For instance, as an investment advisor, I often get pushback from my guests about asking for their source of funds and complete story about their educational and professional background. And so I like to take this opportunity to teach them about our obligations of know your clients and the scrutiny in the banking industry that we face from the OECD through CRS or the IRS through FATCA. And once their eyes glaze over with all these acronyms, I like to bring home the story and let them know that every dollar that transits or is transferred throughout the world must pass through the US, through a US corresponding bank, even if it's just being sent between us and our neighbor Costa Rica. And the information that we're asking for is to help us later on defend the client or our guest of where their money is coming from and why it should ending up at its location. And with that, our guests might commiserate with us and bond because we're both facing some difficult challenges from institutions, and they might be able to begin to see you as their guide. So it's important to set clear expectations. They don't need to be easy, but it's important that the guest knows what to expect. In my industry, we can't open up a bank account for a foreigner in under an hour. But if the timeline is 5 days or 2 weeks or a month or more, it's our obligation to set expectations so that our guest is prepared. And as a good guide, we can also think ahead for our guests and prepare ourselves for the future expectations of our guest or client. And this is where, just like Zeus and his daughter Athena and the other gods that wanted to hear the prayers and receive sacrifice regularly from their constituents, in the case of the US, Uncle Sam wants to hear from US clients yearly. Whether it be on banking or business ventures, the US person must annually prepare a package and deliver it with their tax filings. So the second most important takeaway from my presentation would be, we as business leaders should prepare ourselves for what our clients and partners will need. And if we as guides can deliver an annual package that the client needs, this is where we can truly show lasting value, because we are not only taking care of the business at hand, but we're making it easy for them to do ongoing business with us. And that's what we want in the business community, to convert the guest from a tourist to a loyal client, or even a trusted partner. And if these are done well, our guest completes his tests and we can move on to the final act, which is the triumph. The guest is converted from a tourist to a member of Panamanian society and Panamanian economy. Their residency is established. They have a home. They have a banking relationship. Their cash flow and investment needs are addressed. The U.S. reporting information is organized. We ourselves have converted from a host to a guide and maybe even a very trusted partner. So thank you very much. And I'll also step in here and thank you all for your attention. We heard from Maria Lucía and Melinda Schmidt with GCS Partners. Their information is on the screen. Please jot it down. And also myself, David Tuñón Snedeker with MMG Bank. I'm an investment advisor, and my information is also here on the screen. So thank you very much for your attention and the invitation.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a proceder a leer las preguntas. En este momento no observo ninguna pregunta. No sé si alguien tendrá alguna pregunta. Pueden dejarla en el chat. Puede ser tanto en inglés como en español, y si se lo quieren dirigir a alguno de los presentadores. Gracias, Paula, por tu comentario. Estamos a la orden siempre. Sí, definitivamente una muy buena película. Vale la pena verla.
Yes, it's 3 hours long, but it does only feel like 2.
Yeah. Melinda and David, do you have something else that you want to add to the presentation? If not, we can finish, and Sarah can take control. And thank you everyone for being here.
Just like to say that anytime you'd like us to come and speak to you in person as well, so we can meet you and see your faces and discuss these topics in person, it would be a very nice invitation as well.
And I will add, it was a pleasure to speak with you on the subject. As a U.S. person, I know that, and working in Panama quite a bit, I know that financial institutions are very reluctant to establish accounts for U.S. people, because it seems like it's really full of challenges and difficulties. Because I advise financial institutions in Panama on how to do that, I, of course, think it's super easy. And I think it is. I think it is not too difficult once you know what the rules are and how to apply them. But you've all dealt with FATCA and CRS. Those are worse than a lot of the other rules for establishing accounts for U.S. people. So if you've mastered that and you're finishing up maybe today or tomorrow, then you really have achieved a lot of the challenges or met the challenges for having an account of a U.S. person. If any of you want to follow up with that and talk about it further, I'm more than happy to take your call or your email.
Bueno, muchas gracias nuevamente a todos por su presencia, y como mencionó Melinda, queda a la orden en caso de querer contactarnos.
Muchas gracias.
Hasta luego, muchas gracias
por la presentación. Thank you very much.
Hasta luego.
Hasta
Muchas
luego,
gracias.